What happens when a man who has everything meets a woman who refuses to be impressed? Ethan Caldwell was a millionaire CEO, heir to a vast empire, used to buying respect with a signature and love with a diamond. To the world, he was untouchable until the day he met Claire Dawson, a quiet maid who looked him in the eye and said one simple word he had never heard before: no. That word would shatter his ego and awaken his soul. But can love truly survive the clash of two worlds, one built on marble floors and champagne towers, the other on long bus rides and double shifts at a diner? Can a man born into privilege learn the value of humility before it's too late? And can a woman who has fought for every scrap of dignity trust that his change is real? This is not just a love story. It's a story about courage, about transformation, about discovering that true wealth is not counted in dollars, but in respect, resilience, and the courage to grow. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. Ethan Caldwell had always believed that the city of Chicago revolved around him. It wasn't arrogance, at least not in his own mind. It was simply the reality he had lived in since birth. The Caldwell family name was etched into skyscrapers, carved into park benches, and printed on the glossy programs of nearly every charitable gala in town. His grandfather had built Caldwell Real Estate into a multi-billion-dollar empire, and Ethan, the only son, inherited not only the fortune, but also the expectation that he would expand it even further. At 32, Ethan lived on the 59th floor of a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. From his bedroom, he could watch the sunrise turn the water into sheets of gold. From his living room, he could see the glittering skyline stretch like a promise of endless opportunity. Yet, for all the breathtaking views, the place always felt strangely empty. He had his routines. Mornings usually began late, too many evenings spent at events that he barely remembered. His nights were filled with champagne flutes, practiced smiles, and conversations about investments and art auctions. People laughed at his jokes, nodded at his opinions, and admired his perfectly tailored suits. But behind the applause and flattery, Ethan often sensed the hollowness. Still, he told himself this was the life he was supposed to live, until one quiet morning, everything shifted. Claire Dawson had arrived at the penthouse just a week earlier, 26 years old. She wasn't the type to leave much of an impression at first glance. She wore simple jeans and plain shirts, her brown hair tied back in a neat ponytail, her sneakers slightly worn. To most, she was invisible, a maid hired through an agency to keep Ethan's palatial home spotless. But Claire carried a different weight in her posture. There was strength in the way she moved a mop across the floor, and determination in the way she straightened picture frames. Her hands bore faint scars from years of work waiting tables, cleaning houses, stocking shelves in a grocery store. Every scar was a story, though she rarely shared them. Most mornings, Ethan didn't cross paths with staff. His assistant managed everything: hiring, schedules, payments. Employees drifted in and out of his home like shadows. Yet, on this particular Tuesday, Ethan woke unusually early. The city was still stretching awake as he walked barefoot into his living room, expecting silence. Instead, he froze. There, kneeling on the marble floor, was Claire. Her sleeves rolled up. She scrubbed at a stubborn stain with such focus it looked like a battle between her willpower and the cleaning solution. The early sunlight poured through the windows, catching the strands of hair that had slipped from her ponytail. She didn't notice him right away. Ethan cleared his throat, waiting for the familiar gasp of recognition, the flustered smile, the eager small talk he always received from strangers who recognized his face from business magazines. But Claire only glanced up for a brief second. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she said evenly. Then she bent back to her task, scrubbing as if the stain mattered more than the millionaire standing behind her. Ethan blinked. That was it. No compliment, no wide-eyed look at the view, no attempt at conversation. He was used to being treated like a celebrity, admired for the empire he represented. And here he was, standing in his own penthouse, feeling less important than a patch of dirty marble. A strange irritation rose in his chest. Or was it curiosity? He stepped forward, letting his confidence carry him the way it always did. So, he began with a charming smile. "You're the new hire, right? Must be something. Working in a place like this. This penthouse has been featured in Architectural Digest. You know." Claire paused, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, and looked up at him. Her eyes, a clear gray, held no awe, only calm practicality. "To me, a floor is just a floor," she said. "Doesn't matter if it's in a magazine cover home or a basement on the south side. Dirt's still dirt." For a moment, Ethan had no words. The reply was so blunt, so unbothered, that he let out a short, awkward laugh. He tried again, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Did you know this marble was imported from Italy? It costs more than most cars." Claire studied the marble for a beat, then looked back at him. "Interesting. Do you want me to scrub it in Italian, or is English fine?" His jaw nearly dropped. Was she mocking him? No one ever mocked him, not openly, not without regret. And yet, there was something sharp but not cruel in her tone. It wasn't malice. It was honesty, wrapped in dry humor. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself at a loss. And oddly enough, he liked it. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the squeak of her scrubbing brush. Ethan straightened, suddenly aware of how ridiculous he must look, standing there in designer sweatpants, trying to impress a woman who clearly didn't care about imported marble. In another life, he might have dismissed her immediately. He could have called the agency, demanded someone else, replaced her without a thought. But something stopped him, something in her unflinching composure, in her refusal to treat him as anything more than another man, kept him rooted in place. It was the smallest moment, barely a ripple in the morning, yet Ethan felt a spark he couldn't explain. For Claire, it was nothing, just another morning, another floor, another stain to scrub. She had bills waiting at home, a mother whose health worried her, and a night class she couldn't afford to miss. The millionaire behind her wasn't part of her world. He was noise, a distraction she refused to let herself notice. But for Ethan, the world had just tilted. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet encounter, the maid who said good morning without looking twice, who refused to play his game, was the beginning of everything. Ethan Caldwell wasn't used to silence that didn't bend to his presence. Usually, when he entered a room, the conversation shifted, the air changed, and people leaned closer as if his very existence pulled gravity toward him. But here in his own penthouse, the only sound was the steady rhythm of Claire Dawson's scrubbing brush against the marble. He cleared his throat again, louder this time. Nothing. She was still on her knees, working with the same focus she had shown when he first walked in. "I'll admit," Ethan said, sliding his hands into his pockets, "not many people get to start their morning with this view." He gestured toward the wall of glass where the skyline shimmered in the early light. "Chicago's crown jewel, right here in my living room." Claire glanced up for a moment, her gray eyes calm and unreadable. "I don't really look at the view," she replied, her tone matter of fact. "Windows show the same streaks no matter where they are. A squeegee doesn't care if it's the 50th floor or ground level." Ethan raised his eyebrows. "That's pragmatic," he said with a chuckle, though the dismissal stung. He tried again, shifting closer, angling his wrist so the Rolex on it caught the light. "This watch," he said conversationally, "was custom designed in Geneva. It's worth more than most people's yearly salary." Claire sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on a rag. For a moment, Ethan thought he finally had her attention. Instead, she tilted her head, unimpressed. "Then it's a shame," she said, "that it still tells the same time as the 20-1 at Target." The reply landed like a dart. Ethan laughed, though it came out sharper than he intended. "You've got a quick tongue." "I just tell the truth," Claire answered, reaching for another cleaning cloth. "Dust doesn't care how much money you have. It settles on everything the same way. Rich, poor, penthouse, basement, makes no difference." Ethan studied her more carefully now. She wasn't being rude exactly. There was no malice in her words. If anything, there was a quiet dignity in the way she spoke, like she was standing on ground no one could buy from her. Most women he encountered tried to flatter him. They asked about his investments, complimented his style, laughed too hard at his jokes. They wanted something access, prestige, security. Claire, on the other hand, seemed to want absolutely nothing from him. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He tried to regain footing, flashing the charming smile that had opened countless boardroom doors. You know, this penthouse was featured in Architectural Digest. Twice. They called it a masterpiece of modern design. Claire reached for a spray bottle, gave the marble a few quick mists, and replied without looking at him. Funny. I'd call it a floor. The words hit harder than he expected. Ethan ran a hand over his jaw, unsure whether to be annoyed or entertained. He decided on entertained. You're direct. I like that. She gave a small shrug, as if his approval meant nothing at all. For the first time, Ethan felt the edges of something he hadn't felt in years, challenge. Not in the sense of a business deal or a negotiation he could win with numbers and lawyers, but in something subtler, a human interaction where his money, his reputation, and his influence had no leverage. The conversation might have ended there, but Ethan wasn't ready to let it go. He leaned against the counter, folding his arms in a way that displayed his perfectly tailored shirt and the expensive watch again. So, tell me, Claire, he said, testing the sound of her name. Do you ever stop to think what it would be like to live in a place like this? To wake up every day surrounded by glass and marble, instead of... He paused deliberately. Instead of cleaning it, her head turned sharply, eyes meeting his with a steady intensity that startled him. No, she said flatly, because this isn't my life. My life is working 2 jobs, getting through night school, and making sure my mom gets to her doctor's appointments. I don't waste time imagining myself in someone else's story. Ethan's smirk faltered. The way she said it wasn't bitter, just certain in a way that made him feel, for the first time, like he might be the one standing on unsteady ground. He pushed off the counter, crossing the room with deliberate ease. You know, most people would give anything to trade places with me, he said, lowering his voice as if letting her in on a secret. Private jets, luxury cars, the finest wine, not to mention this view. Claire rose to her feet slowly, the cleaning rag still in her hand. She was at least a head shorter than him, but in that moment, she didn't seem small. She seemed immovable. Maybe, she admitted. But you know what? I think most people just want a safe home, a steady job, and someone they can count on. The rest is decoration. The honesty in her tone left Ethan speechless for a beat. Decoration. Was that what his entire life amounted to? Marble floors, designer watches, glossy magazine spreads, just decoration. Something twisted in his chest, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. He forced a laugh, shaking off the thought. You've got an answer for everything, don't you? I have an honest answer for everything, Claire corrected gently. That's different. Ethan should have ended the conversation there. He should have retreated to the safety of his office, poured himself a coffee, and dismissed the maid's bluntness as insignificant. But he couldn't. Instead, he found himself lingering, watching as she bent down again to continue her work. Her movements were precise, steady, purposeful. She didn't rush, didn't cut corners, even scrubbing a floor. She carried herself with a kind of dignity that he couldn't quite define, and for reasons he didn't yet understand. Ethan Caldwell, the man who had everything, suddenly wanted to know more about the woman who seemed to want nothing from him at all. The following morning, Ethan Caldwell lingered longer than usual in the penthouse. Normally, he left before the cleaning staff arrived, preferring not to watch the machinery of his life being polished and reset. But today, he stayed coffee cup in hand, tie loosened, pacing near the windows. It wasn't the skyline that held him there. It was the thought of Claire Dawson, somewhere in his home, moving with that quiet precision that unsettled him. When he finally found her in the dining room, Carefully dusting the heavy oak table, he leaned against the doorway. Casual but calculated. "Claire," he said smoothly, "how do you feel about live music, champagne, and caviar?" She glanced at him over her shoulder, the feather duster pausing mid-swipe. "Depends," she replied. "Am I cleaning up after it, or just watching?" Ethan smiled, undeterred. "Neither. I'm inviting you. There's a gala tomorrow night at the Palmer House. Black tie, the kind of event people beg me for an invitation to." Claire set the duster down, turning to face him fully. Her eyes steady, gray, and unflinching met his. "And you want me there." Why he stepped into the room, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. "Because you're different. You don't act impressed. You don't flatter me. It's refreshing. And frankly, I think you'd look stunning in an evening gown." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Ethan was used to anticipation, to the quick, eager yes that usually followed such offers. Instead, Claire crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Caldwell," she began slowly, "I'm not an accessory to hang on your arm. I'm not a conversation piece to surprise your friends. And expensive champagne doesn't change the fact that, at the end of the day, it's still just fizzy water." Her words hit him harder than expected, clean, sharp, like glass cutting through silk. He blinked, caught off guard. "You're turning me down, I am," she said, with a calm certainty that left no room for negotiation. "Thank you for the offer, but no." The rejection landed like a stone dropped in water, silent at first, then rippling outward. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. In all his 35 years, he could not remember the last time someone had told him no so directly. Deals closed because he wanted them to. Women said yes because they wanted what came with him. Staff obeyed because it was their job. But Claire. She dismissed his offer as if it were no more significant than declining an extra napkin at a diner. "You realize," he said after a pause, trying to mask the sting with humor, "most people would kill for an invitation like this." "Then invite most people," Claire replied, picking up her duster again. Ethan watched her resume her work as if the conversation had ended. His pride urged him to walk away, to laugh it off, to tell himself she wasn't worth the effort. But he couldn't move. That evening, Ethan sat in his office overlooking the city, papers sprawled across his desk, but the numbers and contracts blurred together, meaningless. His thoughts circled back to the same scene, Claire, standing there with quiet strength, saying no. It wasn't just the refusal, it was the way she looked at him, not with admiration, not with disdain, but with a kind of detached honesty, as though his wealth, his reputation, his entire carefully built image meant nothing, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, that unsettled him more than any business rival ever had. He poured himself a glass of scotch, letting the burn chase down the knot in his chest. Why did it matter? She was a maid, one employee among dozens. Her world and his barely overlapped. By tomorrow, he should forget the entire exchange. Yet, he couldn't. The truth gnawed at him. Her rejection had stripped away the armor he wore so easily. For the first time, Ethan Caldwell wasn't sure who he was without the wealth, the charm, the status. Late that night, he found himself pacing the penthouse again, replaying the words in his mind. "I'm not an accessory. Champagne is just fizzy water." Simple sentences, but they pierced straight through the layers of ego he had spent years building. He thought about the women from his past, the socialites, the heiresses, the carefully dressed professionals who laughed at all the right times. None of them had ever spoken to him like that. None of them had refused him outright. And that was precisely why he couldn't let it go. By morning, Ethan was still restless. He arrived at the office earlier than usual, his staff exchanging surprised glances. He buried himself in meetings, but every pause in conversation, every moment of silence, brought him back to the same nagging thought. Why did it matter what one maid thought of him? Why did her no echo louder than the countless yeses he had collected in his life? And why, instead of diminishing her in his mind, Did the rejection only make him more curious? That night, as the city pulsed below him, Ethan realized with a mix of frustration and fascination, he wanted to know more. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a quiet, understated way, not because she was a puzzle to be solved, but because for the first time in his life, someone had looked past the glitter, past the money, past the performance, and refused to play his game. And that was a challenge Ethan Caldwell wasn't ready to walk away from. Ethan Caldwell had always believed he understood people. Years of boardroom battles had taught him to read expressions, detect weakness, and calculate motivations with surgical precision. But Claire Dawson remained an exception. Ever since she turned down his gala invitation, Ethan found himself noticing her more often, though he told himself it was only curiosity, a passing interest. Yet, every detail about her seemed to chip away at the portrait of indifference he had tried to paint. One afternoon, he returned home earlier than usual, surprising his staff. As he passed through the kitchen, he paused. Claire was sitting alone at the small corner table, her lunch neatly unwrapped from foil. No designer salad, no catered meal, no delivery bag, just a simple sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. She ate quickly, almost mechanically, her eyes on a small paperback book propped open beside her meal. Ethan leaned against the doorway, unnoticed for once. The book wasn't a romance novel or celebrity magazine. It was Principles of Business Administration. He studied her with quiet fascination. She wasn't idling away her break. She wasn't gossiping with the other staff. She was learning, preparing, building something. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, Ethan felt an odd pull of respect. In the following days, Ethan began to pay closer attention. He noticed how Claire always arrived 15 minutes early, her clothes simple but immaculate, how she worked with the same steady pace from morning until evening, never rushing, never cutting corners, how she treated every object, from crystal vases to wooden banisters, with the same care. There was no laziness in her, no entitlement, no trace of the bitterness he might have expected from someone surrounded by wealth she could never touch. Instead, there was quiet dignity in every movement. One evening, Ethan was reviewing emails when he heard the faint click of the front door closing. Curious, he checked the clock. Claire's shift had ended half an hour earlier. Yet, the sound carried urgency, like someone in a hurry. Without fully understanding why, Ethan grabbed his coat and followed. He caught sight of her 3 blocks down, moving quickly along the sidewalk. She didn't notice him. Her focus was forward, purposeful. Ethan kept a careful distance, feeling absurdly like a schoolboy sneaking after someone. Claire boarded a bus, slipping into a crowded seat. Ethan flagged down his driver and ordered, "Follow that bus!" The bus wound its way out of the polished streets near Ethan's penthouse into humbler neighborhoods where storefronts were weathered and sidewalks cracked. Claire got off near a neon sign that flickered Lou's Diner. Through the wide windows, Ethan saw her slip inside, tying an apron around her waist. She moved behind the counter with practiced ease, refilling coffee cups, jotting down orders, balancing plates of food with the confidence of someone who had done it countless times. Ethan remained in the car, stunned. She worked here after scrubbing marble floors all day. She spent her evenings serving hash browns and pancakes in a corner diner. The thought struck him like a weight. Most people he knew complained about 12-hour workdays while sipping cocktails on rooftop bars. Claire was living them, without complaint, without glamour, just necessity. But the surprises weren't finished. 2 hours later, as the diner lights dimmed, Ethan saw Claire leave again. Instead of heading home, she walked briskly toward a nearby community college. He followed at a distance, parking across the street as she disappeared into a classroom marked Business Administration, Evening Program. Ethan sat back, silent. The image replayed in his mind, Claire on her knees cleaning marble, Claire balancing plates at the diner, Claire opening her textbooks under fluorescent lights at night. She wasn't just working, she was fighting for something bigger than her present circumstances. Later that night, Ethan returned to his penthouse, but the silence felt heavier than usual. He poured himself a drink, but the taste was flat. He switched on the television, but the news anchor's voices rang hollow. All he could see was Claire, carrying herself with quiet determination through 3 separate worlds in a single day. He thought of his own routine chauffeured rides, boardroom meetings, catered meals, endless parties. How often had he complained about being tired when his exhaustion was nothing compared to hers? And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell felt something he hadn't expected to feel toward anyone in years: admiration. He tried to rationalize it. Plenty of people worked 2 jobs, plenty of people studied at night, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just what Claire did, it was how she did it without fanfare, without self-pity, without compromise. The image of her in that classroom lingered longest. While others wasted hours pretending to be important, she was actually building a future. It stirred something uncomfortably human in him, something that didn't fit neatly into his world of deals and acquisitions. As he prepared for bed, Ethan found himself standing at the window, staring at the city stretched out before him. The skyline had always been his symbol of triumph, a reminder of everything he had conquered. Tonight, it felt different, because somewhere out there, a maid who had told him no was teaching him, without even trying, what real strength looked like. And Ethan Caldwell realized with a quiet jolt, he wasn't just curious anymore. He was impressed. It began with a detail Ethan almost missed. For days, he had noticed Claire's hurried exits at the end of her shift, the way she kept checking her phone during breaks, her expression tight, her shoulders drawn. Something wasn't right. One evening, unable to resist his growing concern, he followed again, this time to the emergency wing of a hospital on the south side. Through the wide glass doors, he saw Claire at the reception desk, her voice urgent, her face pale. A nurse led her down the hall, and soon Ethan caught a glimpse of an older woman lying in a hospital bed, wires and monitors surrounding her fragile frame. Her mother. The sight stayed with him all night, haunting him. He could still picture the lines of worry etched across Claire's face, the way she pressed her mother's hand as though holding it could steady the world. The next morning, Ethan made a call. James, he told his personal accountant, "I want you to cover the hospital bills for a patient." Quietly, no trace back to me. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell." "Who's the patient?" "Her name is Rosa Dawson," Ethan said, the name heavy on his tongue. Full payment, no delays. He hung up with a strange sense of relief. For once, he thought, he had done something right, not a business deal, not a purchase, but an act of generosity. 2 weeks passed. Then came the knock. Claire stood in his office doorway, her jaw tight, her eyes burning. She didn't ask permission to enter. She simply stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind her. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. "Of course. Sit down." She didn't. Instead, she crossed the room until she stood directly across from his desk, arms folded like armor. "You paid my mother's hospital bills." It wasn't a question. Ethan tried to keep his tone light. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." Claire's voice cut sharp. "The hospital called to say everything was paid. They wouldn't tell me who, but I traced it back. It was you." Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing the charade was pointless. "So, what if it was?" He said, spreading his hands. "You needed help. I helped." Claire leaned forward, palms flat on his desk. "The problem isn't the money. The problem is that I didn't ask for your help, and I will not accept your pity." "Pity," Ethan repeated, startled. "That's not what this was. What she demanded, cutting him off. Charity. Some grand gesture to make yourself feel better. Another way to prove that money fixes everything." Her words struck deeper than he expected. Ethan opened his mouth, but no answer came. For the first time in years, he felt defenseless. "I saw you struggling." He tried again, softer now. I thought I was doing the right thing." Claire shook her head, disappointment shadowing her features. "You don't understand. Do you? I'm proud that I can support my mother. Proud that every long shift, every class, every hour I work puts food on our table and pays her bills. That's dignity. And you stepped all over it. Her voice trembled not with weakness, but with controlled anger. You wanted to be the hero who saves the poor maid and her sick mother. But that's not kindness. Ethan, that's ego dressed up as generosity. The words sliced through him. Ego. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth in her tone silenced him. For years, Ethan had believed money was the solution to every problem. It bought comfort, loyalty, influence. Why wouldn't it buy gratitude too? But here was Claire, standing in front of him, telling him his money wasn't salvation. It was intrusion. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just anger, but pain that came from someone trampling over the fragile pride she had worked so hard to hold on to. Claire, he began, his voice unsteady. I'm sorry. No, she said firmly, straightening up. Don't apologize to me unless you mean it. Do you even know the difference between helping and controlling? Ethan blinked. What do you mean? Helping is asking what someone needs, she said, her eyes unwavering. Controlling is deciding for them. You didn't ask me what I needed. You just wrote a check. Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She turned toward the door, pausing only once. If you really want to prove you've changed, prove it with actions, not money. And then she was gone, leaving Ethan alone in the vast, silent office. For a long time, Ethan sat frozen, staring at the space she had left behind. The hum of the city below felt distant, meaningless. He had thought generosity would redeem him. Instead, it had exposed something ugly, his instinct to control, to solve with dollars what he couldn't with heart. For the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell felt small, not small in power or wealth, but as a man. And sitting there, with her words echoing in his mind, he asked himself a question he had never dared confront before. If money isn't the answer, then who am I without it? The words Claire left behind after the hospital bill confrontation echoed in Ethan's head for days. Actions, not money. They were simple words, but they gnawed at him. For the first time, he questioned whether his wealth was less a gift and more a crutch. If money couldn't earn him respect, if it couldn't even make Claire smile, what good was it? So, one Friday morning, Ethan Caldwell decided to try something radical. He would live like everyone else. The first challenge came almost immediately. Instead of calling his driver, Ethan stood awkwardly on the corner outside his building, watching people swarm toward the subway entrance. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, hoping no one recognized him. Descending into the station, the smell hit him first metal, coffee, and something faintly sour. He fumbled with the ticket machine, drawing an impatient sigh from the woman behind him. Press the green button, she snapped. Ethan, who had negotiated contracts worth billions, flushed as he pressed the button like a lost tourist. When the train roared in, he nearly stumbled backward from the rush of air. People piled inside, pressing shoulder to shoulder. Ethan squeezed in too, gripping the pole with one hand. For the first time in years, there was no private car, no leather seat, no tinted windows, just humanity breathing around him, the rhythm of strangers' lives brushing against his own. By the time he reached the stop near Claire's diner, his shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly mussed, and his patience tested. Yet, oddly, he felt alive. He stepped into the diner, choosing a booth in the corner. Claire spotted him instantly, her eyes widening with disbelief. Mr. Caldwell, she asked, balancing a tray of pancakes. Ethan, he corrected, smiling sheepishly. I thought I'd try breakfast here. Heard the coffee's good. Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. Almost. It's burnt half the time. Perfect, Ethan replied, opening the sticky menu. I'll take whatever's burnt the least. The food was simple scrambled eggs, toast, a mug of coffee that tasted more like charcoal than beans. But Ethan ate every bite, determined not to flinch. He even left a generous tip, though this time not out of pride, but genuine gratitude. Claire passed by his table again. shaking her head. You really don't belong here. Maybe not, Ethan admitted, but I want to understand what matters to you. And this feels closer to real life than my penthouse ever has. Something flickered in her eyes, distrust mixed with curiosity. That evening, when Claire finished her shift, Ethan was waiting outside. Don't worry, he said quickly, raising his hands. I'm not stalking you. He hesitated. Would you let me walk you home? She studied him for a long moment, as though weighing his sincerity. Finally, she sighed. Fine. But no more grand gestures. Her home was a modest apartment on the edge of town. The paint peeled in places. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and fried food. Inside, however, everything was neat, books stacked carefully. A faded quilt draped over the couch, family photos on the wall. Ethan looked around with quiet awe. It's warm, he said honestly. Claire arched an eyebrow. Warm. That's the word you're going with. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. I meant it feels lived in. Real. She shook her head, but couldn't hide the faint smile tugging at her lips. Then, to Ethan's surprise, Claire tossed him an apron. Since you're so curious about real life, she said, you're helping me make dinner. Ethan stared at the apron as though it were a foreign object. You want me to cook, I barely know how to boil water. Then it's time you learn, and so began the comedy. Ethan cracked an egg too hard, splattering yolk across the counter. He dropped a wooden spoon into the pot, splashing sauce onto his shirt. At one point, he nearly set a dish towel on fire, earning an exasperated groan from Claire. But through her frustration, she laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that filled the small kitchen like sunlight. Ethan froze at the sound, stunned. It was the first time he had heard her laugh pure, uncalculated, genuine, and it did something to him he couldn't quite name. Dinner was simple spaghetti, slightly overcooked, with garlic bread a bit too crisp, but Ethan swore it was the best meal he'd ever had. They sat across from each other at the small table, the clatter of forks and the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between them. For once, Ethan didn't feel the need to perform, to impress, to dominate the room. He just felt present. Later, as he left her apartment, Ethan paused at the door. Claire, he said softly, thank you for letting me see this part of your world. She met his gaze, her expression softer than usual. Don't thank me yet. One dinner doesn't make you a different man. Maybe not, Ethan admitted, but it's a start. That night, back in his penthouse, Ethan stood at the window as usual. The city still glittered below, but something inside him had shifted. The view felt less like a trophy and more like a reminder of the distance between who he was and who he wanted to be. And in that small, warm apartment with peeling paint and laughter over burnt bread, he had glimpsed something he never thought he needed belonging. For the first time, Ethan Caldwell wasn't just curious about Claire Dawson. He was beginning to fall in love. Over the next few weeks, a rhythm began to form, one neither Ethan nor Claire had planned, but both quietly leaned into. It started with small things. Ethan showing up at the diner again, stubbornly ordering burnt coffee and hash browns as though it were a delicacy. Claire rolling her eyes but secretly smiling when she saw him studying the laminated menu as if it were a stock report. Then came the evenings when Ethan lingered near her apartment, waiting until her shift ended. Sometimes they walked the 2 blocks in silence. Sometimes he asked about her classes, and other times he simply listened while she vented about rude customers and professors who assigned too much reading. The more time they spent together, the less Ethan felt like the CEO of Caldwell Real Estate, and the less Claire could dismiss him as just another entitled millionaire. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan found himself in Claire's kitchen again, apron tied around his waist, determined to master spaghetti without burning the bread this time. You're chopping those onions like you're signing contracts, Claire teased, watching his stiff precision. Old habits die hard, Ethan muttered, blinking back tears from the sting. I negotiate billion-dollar deals with less pain than this. She laughed, the sound bubbling up naturally, and Ethan felt the same strange warmth as before. He couldn't remember the last time someone had laughed with him, not at his wealth, not at his status, but at the simple absurdity of him struggling with onions. As they cooked, their conversation drifted. Claire shared stories of her childhood bike rides through quiet neighborhoods, summers working at an ice cream stand, her mother's unwavering support despite illness and hardship. In return, Ethan spoke of his own childhood, though his memories were painted with a different brush: boarding schools, nannies, and long stretches without his parents. He admitted that sometimes, even in a house full of staff, he had felt more alone than ever. The honesty between them hung in the air like a fragile thread, weaving their worlds closer together. Later, over their meal, Claire found herself studying Ethan in the soft glow of the kitchen light. He wasn't the polished CEO in a tailored suit. He wasn't the man who flaunted imported marble and Rolex watches. He was simply Ethan, messy-haired, sleeves rolled, laughing at his own clumsiness. And against her will, her heart tugged, but with the tug came fear. That night, lying awake in her small bedroom, Claire replayed the moments in her mind, his laughter, his stories, the way he listened when she spoke, as if her words mattered in a way no one else's did. It terrified her, because beneath the warmth, she couldn't ignore the truth. Ethan Caldwell belonged to a world built on glass towers and gala dinners, while she belonged to one of double shifts and overdue bills. Their lives were parallel lines, never meant to meet. What would people say if they knew that she was chasing his money, that she was out of her depth? Claire closed her eyes tightly, whispering to herself, "Don't fall for him. Don't be foolish." Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Ethan paced the length of his living room. The skyline glittered beyond the windows, but his mind was elsewhere, back in that small apartment where burnt bread and laughter had felt more real than anything his fortune had ever bought. He thought about Claire's hands, scarred from years of work, moving confidently as she stirred sauce. He thought about her voice, steady as she spoke of her mother, of her classes, of her dreams. And he thought about how, for the first time, he wanted to be worthy of someone, not because of what he had, but because of who he was. The following week, after a long evening class, Claire found Ethan waiting outside her community college. "You didn't have to come all the way here," she said, surprised. "I wanted to," he replied simply. They walked together under the streetlights, their footsteps echoing against the pavement. The night was cool, the city humming softly around them. "You work so hard," Ethan said after a while. "Don't you ever get tired?" Claire gave a small laugh, though it held no humor. "All the time. But tired doesn't pay bills. Tired doesn't put food on the table. You just keep going." Ethan was silent for a moment, then asked quietly, "And what keeps you going?" Claire hesitated, then whispered, "Hope. That someday things will be better. For me, for my mom." Her honesty pierced him. He wanted to promise her everything, that he would make it easier, that she would never have to struggle again. But he bit back the words, remembering how badly his last attempt at helping had gone. "Instead," he said softly, "you deserve that, more than anyone I know." As they reached her building, Claire turned to face him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something fragile and unspoken. For a heartbeat, Ethan thought she might let it surface. But then she looked away, shaking her head slightly. "Good night, Ethan." And with that, she disappeared inside, leaving him standing on the sidewalk with his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. In the quiet of her apartment, Claire leaned against the door, her chest tight. Feelings had begun to bloom, undeniable and dangerous. She could see the change in him, see the man beneath the CEO mask, but she also knew the cost of letting herself believe in something impossible. "Don't fall," she reminded herself again, but the truth whispered back, steady and insistent she already was. The change in Ethan Caldwell hadn't gone unnoticed. For weeks, his friends in Chicago's elite circles had whispered about it. The once untouchable CEO was seen at a diner instead of a steakhouse, strolling through ordinary neighborhoods, even spotted scandalously in an apron. The gossip spread like wildfire through charity luncheons and cocktail parties. Ethan Caldwell is different, and it's because of a woman. It was only a matter of time before Victoria Hayes returned. Victoria was everything the Caldwell family had once envisioned for Ethan: polished, poised, and perfectly at home in a world of champagne flutes and gallery openings. With her sharp cheekbones, couture dresses, and Ivy League wit, she had been his partner in glittering evenings, the kind of woman who photographed well on his arm. But beneath her charm was steel-calculated ambition that saw people less as companions and more as stepping stones. Years ago, Ethan had walked away, weary of the constant performance. Yet she had never truly left his orbit, and now, sensing weakness or perhaps opportunity, she reappeared. It happened at a Caldwell Foundation fundraiser, the kind of event Ethan usually dreaded. This time, however, he had brought Claire. She had been hesitant at first. "I don't belong in rooms like that," she'd whispered. "You belong wherever you want to be," Ethan had assured her. So, there she was, in a simple navy dress she'd bought on clearance, her hair pinned back neatly. She wasn't draped in diamonds like the others, but there was a quiet grace about her that drew more attention than glitter ever could. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her, until Victoria appeared. "Ethan," she purred, gliding toward him with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "It's been too long." Her eyes flicked to Claire, lingering just long enough to register judgment. Then she smiled a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "And who is this?" she asked, though the tone suggested she already knew. "This is Claire Dawson," Ethan said firmly. "A friend?" Victoria extended her manicured hand, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. "Claire," she said sweetly. "What a lovely dress. I had one just like it when I was in high school." Claire froze, heat rising to her cheeks. She withdrew her hand slowly, murmuring a polite thank you. Victoria's smile widened. She turned back to Ethan. "I must admit, I didn't expect you here with someone like her. I thought you preferred women who fit." "Fit what?" Ethan asked, his voice dangerously low. "Fit your world," Victoria replied smoothly. "It's nothing against her, of course, but people should stay where they belong. Don't you think the words sliced through Claire more sharply than she expected? Stay where you belong." The room suddenly felt too large, the chandeliers too bright, the polished laughter too sharp. She became hyper-aware of her clearance rack dress, her scuffed heels, the faint calluses on her hands from years of work. She didn't belong there, not with these people, not with Ethan. She excused herself quietly, retreating to the edge of the ballroom where she could breathe. Ethan, however, remained where he was, his jaw clenched. "Victoria," he said evenly, "your arrogance hasn't changed." "And your standards clearly have," she retorted, sipping her champagne. "Tell me, Ethan, what's the end game here? You'll play house with a maid until you get bored, or maybe she's your charity project." "That did it?" Ethan's voice cut like steel. "She's not a project. She's the most genuine person I've ever known. And unlike you, she doesn't see people as things to be used." Victoria blinked, momentarily thrown off by his vehemence. But then she smirked, unfazed. "We'll see how long that lasts." Meanwhile, across the room, Claire wrestled with herself. Ethan had defended her. Yes. But Victoria's words lingered like poison. "Stay where you belong." The truth was undeniable. Ethan was part of a world she could never truly enter. She could scrub marble floors, pour diner coffee, ace her business classes, but none of it erased the fact that she was the daughter of a factory worker, the caretaker of a sick mother, a woman who lived paycheck to paycheck. And Ethan, he was Ethan Caldwell, billionaire, CEO, the kind of man who belonged in rooms with chandeliers and diamond bracelets. Her heart ached with the weight of it. Later that night, as they left the fundraiser, Ethan noticed her silence. "Claire," he said softly, reaching for her hand, "don't listen to Victoria. She doesn't know you." Claire pulled her hand back, her eyes glistening. She doesn't have to know me. She's right. Ethan, I don't belong in that world. I don't belong with you. He stopped in his tracks, the words hitting him like a blow. Don't say that. You belong wherever you choose to be. And he broke off, struggling, because deep down, he knew she was right. His world and hers were separated by walls thicker than glass, built from generations of wealth and expectation. But as he looked at her, standing there in her simple dress with her quiet strength, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he didn't want Victoria's world anymore. He wanted Claire's. The morning after the fundraiser, the story spread through Chicago's upper crust faster than the morning editions of the Tribune. Ethan Caldwell had brought her a maid to the gala. And not only that, he had openly defended her against Victoria Hayes, the darling of the city's elite. It was the kind of scandal that kept the gossip columns alive for weeks. By noon, Ethan's phone buzzed with messages from board members, shareholders, and even his own mother, all variations of the same anxious refrain. What are you thinking? For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't care. That evening, he hosted a small gathering at one of the Caldwell board lounges, a space often reserved for networking with powerful families. But instead of discussing mergers or investment portfolios, Ethan had only one purpose: to put an end to speculation. Claire had resisted coming. "They don't want me there," she said. "They don't get to decide that," Ethan replied. "Come with me." She came, but her hands trembled as they entered the marble-floored room filled with suits and cocktail dresses. Conversations fell silent when they walked in. Eyes turned, lips whispered, eyebrows arched. Victoria was already there, of course, perched elegantly with a glass of wine, as if waiting for the curtain to rise on a play she had scripted. "Ethan," one board member said, forcing a tight smile, "perhaps we should speak privately." "No," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady. "If I'm going to say this, I'll say it here, in front of all of you." He reached for Claire's hand, lacing his fingers with hers. She stiffened, but didn't pull away. "This is Claire Dawson," Ethan announced. "She's not just a maid. She's the woman I love. And I won't hide that from anyone, not from my family, not from the press, and certainly not from all of you." A ripple went through the room. Some gasped, some scoffed. One man nearly dropped his drink. Victoria laughed lightly, though her eyes glimmered with fury. "How noble," she said, "trading champagne for dust." "Enough," Ethan snapped. "Victoria, whatever we had is in the past. I don't want it. I don't want you. I choose Claire. Today, tomorrow, always." For a brief moment, silence held the room like a fragile glass dome. Then Victoria rose gracefully, her voice calm but dripping with venom. "Very touching. Ethan, but before you build your fairy tale with Miss Dawson, perhaps she should know the truth about the man she's chosen." Claire's stomach tightened. Victoria produced a thin folder from her clutch. "These," she said, fanning the papers, "are financial documents. Evidence that Ethan Caldwell has been funneling money into Richardson Holdings, currently under federal investigation for fraud and money laundering. Transactions dated only last month." Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked because, of course, a few reporters had been tipped off to be present. Victoria's smile sharpened. "So tell me, Ethan, does Claire know she's fallen in love with a criminal?" Ethan's face flushed with anger. "That's a lie," he said firmly. But doubt had already crept into the room like smoke. Shareholders whispered urgently. One of his board members muttered, "If this is true, we're finished." Claire stood frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. She wanted to believe him. She remembered his awkward subway ride, his laughter over burnt eggs, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. But the documents in Victoria's manicured hands looked real. And hadn't Ethan always lived in a world where money solved everything? Could she be so naive to think he had truly changed Claire? Ethan turned to her, his eyes fierce, almost pleading. "Don't believe her. You know me? You've seen me, really seen me. Do you think I'd be part of something like that? Claire swallowed hard, unable to answer. Because the truth was, she didn't know. She wanted to believe. But for every genuine moment, there was still the shadow of his privilege, his wealth, his past arrogance. Her silence spoke louder than words. Victoria's smile widened. I rest my case. The gathering dissolved into chaos. Board members hurried to their phones. Reporters whispered into microphones. Victoria slipped away, triumphant, leaving behind the smell of expensive perfume and ruin. Ethan stood in the center of it all, still holding Claire's hand, but now her fingers trembled, her grip hesitant. Finally, she pulled away. I need time. Ethan, she whispered. I don't know what to believe right now. The words sliced him deeper than any headline ever could. Claire. But she was already walking toward the exit, her back straight, her shoulders trembling. That night, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights sprawling endlessly below. For years, he had thought the view from the top meant he had everything. But now, staring at the skyline, he realized he had nothing at all, because for the first time, Claire Dawson, the woman who had taught him that dust is still dust, no matter where it settles, wasn't by his side, and it broke him. The storm broke the very next day. Morning headlines screamed across Chicago's papers. Caldwell Charity. Under investigation is Ethan Caldwell's foundation, a front for fraud. Beneath the bold print were images of Ethan walking out of a courthouse years ago during an unrelated legal battle, repurposed to suggest guilt, and alongside them, a neatly packaged exclusive leak of documents supposedly proving that the Caldwell Foundation for Education had funneled money through shell accounts tied to Richardson Holdings. Victoria had played her card, and she had played it well. Claire sat at the small kitchen table in her mother's apartment, the newspaper spread before her. Her mother coughed softly from the couch. Claire, what's wrong? But Claire couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up, her chest heavy. The black ink on the paper seemed to scream at her, louder than any voice. Foundation used as a front. Millions unaccounted for. Anonymous sources confirm irregularities. She pushed the paper away, her hands trembling. When Ethan called that afternoon, she ignored it. The phone buzzed again and again, until finally she picked up. Claire, thank God. Listen to me. Is it true? Her voice was flat, brittle. Of course not. Victoria planted those stories. The documents are fake. I can prove it. Prove it how she snapped, her voice breaking. Because right now, the entire city thinks you used your foundation, your so-called gift to students like me, to wash dirty money. Silence stretched between them. Ethan's breath was ragged. I would never. Claire, you know me. Her laugh came bitter and sharp. Do I, or do I just know the version of you that wanted me to see? She hung up before he could answer. Then she buried her face in her hands, whispering to herself, what if it's all been a lie that evening? She walked aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, the city lights blurred with her tears. She remembered Ethan clumsily swiping his transit card at the subway turnstile, nearly spilling coffee on himself at the diner, laughing like a child over burnt eggs in her kitchen. Those moments had felt real, but now, the documents in black and white painted another story. And hadn't Victoria said exactly what Claire had feared all along? Men like Ethan use money to control, to impress, to cover their sins. Maybe she had been a fool to think she could be the exception. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in his office staring at a pile of reports his legal team had rushed in. His board was in crisis mode. Investors were threatening to pull out. His phone buzzed with journalists demanding comment, but all he could think about was Claire. She hadn't believed him. Her silence, her doubt, cut deeper than the public scandal. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt powerless, not because of the press, not because of money, but because the one person who had taught him to be better no longer trusted him. Claire's struggle only deepened in the days that followed. At the diner where she worked evenings, co-workers whispered, "Isn't that the guy you've been seeing?" Customers left tabloids behind on the counter, the headlines screaming at her while she poured coffee. At school, professors spoke in hushed tones about the Caldwell scandal, unaware that their student sat in the back row with her heart breaking. Everywhere she turned, it felt like Ethan's shadow followed, and with it, the gnawing question, had she fallen in love with a fraud? One night, after a particularly long shift, Claire returned home to find Ethan waiting outside her apartment. His usual composure was gone, his tie hung loose, his eyes hollow. "Claire, please, just hear me out." She hesitated, then stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "Ethan, I can't do this," she said softly. "Everywhere I go, people are talking. They think I was stupid enough to fall for a man who used charity to cover corruption. I don't care what they think," he said, his voice rising with desperation. "I care about you. I swear on my life. I didn't do what they're saying. Give me time. I'll clear my name. But what if you can't?" Her voice cracked. "What if this is who you really are and I just didn't want to see it?" Her words struck like a blade. Ethan reached for her hands, but she stepped back. "I need space," she whispered. "I need to think." And before he could say another word, she slipped back inside, leaving him standing in the cold night air. Inside, Claire collapsed against the door, tears spilling down her face. Her mother stirred on the couch, concerned. "Sweetheart, what happened?" Claire shook her head, sobbing. "I don't know who he is anymore." On the street below, Ethan lingered for a long while, staring up at the faint glow from Claire's window. The city moved on around him, cars rushing past, laughter spilling from a nearby bar, the wind carrying scraps of newspaper with his name printed in bold black letters. But Ethan didn't move. For the first time in his life, he had no idea how to fix something. No strategy, no checkbook, no deal to negotiate, just a heartbreaking in silence. The ballroom at the Harrington Hotel was packed. What was supposed to be a routine investor meeting had transformed into something much bigger. Reporters jostled with cameras, shareholders whispered nervously in clusters, and curious onlookers filled the back rows. The air buzzed with scandal. At the center of it all stood Ethan Caldwell, alone behind a podium. His usual armor of arrogance was gone. Tonight, his voice would be his only defense. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone steady though his chest pounded. "For weeks, rumors have spread that I used my foundation as a cover for corruption. I won't let lies define me or destroy what we've built." He clicked a remote. The massive screen behind him lit up with documents. "This," Ethan said, pointing to the first slide, "is the official dissolution contract, filed months ago, ending all ties with Richardson Holdings. Signed, notarized, and available in public record." The crowd stirred, cameras flashed, and this, another click, is the registration certificate for the Caldwell Foundation for Education, filed with the state of Illinois. Every dollar accounted for, every transaction audited by independent firms. Nothing hidden, nothing laundered. Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan's voice grew stronger. "Victoria Hayes accused me of corruption. What she didn't tell you is that she orchestrated false evidence." These emails another click, revealing a chain of messages show her instructing a private investigator to doctor documents, mix old photographs with new dates, and leak them to the press. A murmur of outrage swept the room. From the front row, Victoria shot to her feet. "That's a fabrication," she shouted, her voice shrill against the heavy silence. Ethan turned toward her, calm but resolute. "Then explain why these emails came from your encrypted account. Explain why the investigator confessed under oath this morning." He raised another paper. "Here is the affidavit, sworn and notarized." Victoria's face drained of color. For the first time, her perfect composure cracked. Ethan let the silence hang, then continued more softly. "I could stop here, with proof of my innocence, but I want to show you something more important." He clicked again. The screen changed not to contracts, but to a new logo, the Rosa Dawson Scholarship Fund. Gasps erupted again. "This fund," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. is named after Rosa Dawson, a woman who worked 2 jobs, raised a daughter on her own, and taught the daughter dignity through hardship. That daughter, Claire, is the reason I stand here as a different man than I was months ago. He paused, scanning the room. Cameras zoomed closer. Through this fund, we've already approved 50 scholarships for students who work while studying, just as Claire does. Not charity, not pity, opportunity, because people like Rosa and Claire are the backbone of this city, and they deserve more than just survival. They deserve to thrive. In the back of the room, Claire froze. She hadn't wanted to come. She had told herself it would only hurt more to watch him spin another story, but something inside her had pulled her there anyway. Now, hearing her mother's name echo through the hall, seeing the logo on the screen, she felt her knees weaken. Her mother, her fierce, unyielding mother, had been honored in a way she could never have imagined. And Ethan, he wasn't talking like a man desperate to save his reputation. He was talking like a man transformed. Ethan leaned closer to the microphone. His voice softened. I don't care if society pages call me reckless. I don't care if investors call me naive. What I care about is living honestly, about proving that money means nothing without integrity. And if standing by Claire Dawson costs me everything else, then so be it. The room erupted. Some applauded, some gasped. Others rushed to capture the moment on camera. But all Ethan saw was Claire, standing frozen in the back, tears shining in her eyes. Victoria, cornered and furious, tried one last attempt. You'll regret this. Ethan, they'll drag you down with them? But her voice sounded small now, drowned by the rising murmur of the crowd. Security approached, and she slipped out through the side exit, her empire of lies crumbling around her. Ethan turned from the podium and stepped off the stage. He didn't look at the investors or the cameras. He walked straight toward Claire. For a long moment, the noise around them faded. It was just the 2 of them. Claire, he said, his voice raw. I didn't do this to win you back. I did it because it's the truth. But if it means anything to you, if I mean anything to you, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. Claire couldn't speak. She only nodded, her heart pounding, her mind a storm of doubt and hope colliding. The weeks following Ethan's public defense were a blur for Claire. Everywhere she went, people talked about the Caldwell press conference. Some praised him for his courage, others dismissed it as theatrics. But what lingered in Claire's mind was not the headlines. It was the sound of her mother's name spoken with reverence, glowing across a screen in front of hundreds of strangers. The Rosa Dawson Scholarship Fund. That night, her mother had cried softly in their small apartment, whispering, he didn't have to do that, Claire, but he did. And for the first time, Claire allowed herself to wonder if Ethan Caldwell truly had changed. The day of her graduation arrived under a wide, cloudless sky. Claire adjusted the stiff black gown, nerves tightening her stomach. She had worked years for this moment, late nights, double shifts, endless sacrifices. This degree was more than paper. It was proof that her struggles meant something. As she lined up with her classmates, she caught a glimpse of her mother in the audience, frail but beaming with pride. That alone was enough to make Claire's throat ache with emotion. The ceremony unfolded with the usual formality deans speaking, names called, students crossing the stage. Claire tried to focus, but a strange energy buzzed in the air, as though something unexpected was about to happen. When her name was called, Claire Dawson, she walked across the stage, her diploma handed to her with practiced smiles. Applause echoed through the auditorium. But before she could step down, movement in the audience caught her eye. Ethan? He was walking down the aisle, not in a tailored suit this time, but in a simple navy blazer, no entourage, no cameras at his side, just Ethan, carrying something small in his hand. The dean looked confused. The audience murmured. Claire froze, her heart thundering in her chest. Ethan stepped onto the stage. Claire, he said, his voice carrying through the microphone that had just moments earlier announced degrees. I know this is your moment, and I would never want to take it from you. But I can't stand here and not say what I need to say. The auditorium fell into stunned silence. Ethan turned to the crowd briefly, then back to Claire. His eyes were steady, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I had everything: money, power, respect. But then I met you. You taught me that none of that matters without integrity, without love, without someone who sees you for who you are, not what you own. Claire's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. You challenged me. Claire, you refused my charity. You mocked my marble floors. You saw through my arrogance. And instead of resenting you for it, I fell in love with you. Every moment since has only made me more certain. He lowered to one knee. Gasps rippled through the hall. From his pocket, he drew a velvet box and opened it, revealing a ring that shimmered under the stage lights. Claire Dawson, he said, his voice breaking. Will you marry me? The auditorium erupted in murmurs, applause, even a few joyful shouts. Claire stood frozen, her heart pounding. She thought of all the moments that had led here, Ethan awkwardly eating burnt eggs in her kitchen, Ethan riding the subway for the first time, Ethan defending her against Victoria's cruelty, Ethan naming a scholarship after her mother. This wasn't the Ethan she had once dismissed as a cold, arrogant CEO. This was the Ethan who had chosen honesty over pride, humility over wealth, love over image. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling, then louder, stronger. Yes. The crowd leapt to its feet, applause thundering through the auditorium. Her classmates cheered, her professors clapped, and her mother sobbed with joy in the front row. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking. Then he rose, and Claire threw her arms around him. They kissed soft, tender, filled with every emotion words couldn't hold. For a moment, the world faded away. There was no audience, no past, no fear, just the two of them, bound by a love that had survived trials neither could have imagined. As they pulled apart, Ethan whispered against her ear, "You've made me the happiest man alive." Claire laughed through her tears. "And you've made me believe again." Together, hand in hand. They turned to face the cheering auditorium. The applause wasn't just for a proposal. It was for a union that had defied wealth, class, and pride. It was for love made real, tested in fire, and stronger for it. And as Ethan and Claire stood side by side, the future stretched before them, uncertain, imperfect, but theirs. The wedding had been small, intimate, almost defiant in its simplicity. No chandeliers, no diamond-studded gowns, no celebrity guest lists. Just family, a handful of close friends, and vows spoken beneath a canopy of spring blossoms. Now, weeks later, Ethan and Claire were settling into married life, not in the glittering penthouse on the 59th floor, not in a sprawling mansion tucked away behind iron gates, but in a modest two-story house in the quiet suburbs, with a creaky front porch and a backyard just big enough for a garden. It wasn't what Chicago's elite expected from Ethan Caldwell, but for Ethan and Claire, it was perfect. Mornings began, not with catered breakfasts, but with the sound of birdsong and the smell of coffee percolating in a worn-out machine. Claire would shuffle into the kitchen, her hair tousled, wearing one of Ethan's oversized t-shirts. Ethan, determined to pull his weight, would already be at the stove spatula in hand, brows furrowed in concentration. "Don't look so worried," Claire teased one morning. "It's just eggs." "Easy for you to say," Ethan muttered, poking the pan. "They don't listen to me." A second later, the eggs hissed and spat, half sticking to the pan, half sliding off onto the counter. Claire burst out laughing. "You're supposed to flip them, not fight them." Ethan groaned but couldn't help grinning. "I closed a billion-dollar merger once. And yet, eggs defeat me." She kissed his cheek, rescuing the spatula from his hand. "That's because eggs aren't impressed by money." The kitchen filled with laughter, and for Ethan, it felt richer than any gala ballroom ever had. Their home became a sanctuary of small joys. Saturdays meant grocery runs at the local market, Ethan pushing the cart while Claire compared prices. He had once spent thousands of dollars on wine in a single evening. Now he found himself celebrating when apples were on sale. Sundays meant yard work. Ethan struggling with a lawnmower while Claire planted flowers in the garden. Neighbors waved as they passed, treating them like any other couple, not as the millionaire and the maid who had shocked Chicago society. Evenings meant cooking together, Claire teaching him the difference between simmer and boil. Ethan inevitably burning the garlic bread, but making her laugh so hard she couldn't stay mad. It wasn't always flawless. Ethan sometimes slipped back into old habits, like booking a reservation at a 5-star restaurant when Claire had planned a quiet dinner at home. And Claire sometimes bristled at his occasional impatience. The remnants of a life lived on fast schedules and high stakes. But instead of widening the gap between them, those moments became lessons. "You don't have to impress me," Claire reminded him one evening when he surprised her with a designer necklace. "I just want you." And slowly, Ethan learned that love wasn't about grandeur. It was about showing up burnt eggs and all. One rainy evening, they curled up on the couch with mismatched blankets, the storm tapping gently at the windows. Ethan glanced at Claire, her head resting on his shoulder, her laughter soft as they watched an old sitcom. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "Miss what? The penthouse, the parties, the world we left behind?" Claire tilted her head, considering. "No," she said finally, "because none of it ever felt like mine. But this," she gestured around their small living room, at the second-hand coffee table covered in books, the candle flickering on the mantel. "This feels like home." Ethan kissed her forehead, his chest tightening with gratitude. For years, he had thought happiness lived in skyscrapers and stock markets. But sitting there, in a small house filled with laughter and burnt garlic bread, he finally understood happiness lived in moments, in love, in sincerity. Weeks turned into months, and their life wove itself into a tapestry of ordinary but extraordinary days. Claire would laugh every time Ethan mispronounced the names of cleaning supplies at the grocery store. Ethan would grin every time Claire pretended to scold him for tracking mud into the kitchen. They had arguments. Yes, about bills, about schedules, about whether or not Ethan was allowed near the stove unsupervised. But even those arguments ended in laughter, hugs, and whispered promises to do better. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. On their 6-month anniversary, Ethan surprised Claire not with diamonds or a luxury vacation, but with a simple wooden swing he had built for the backyard. "I wanted to give you something we could both enjoy," he said sheepishly, rubbing his hands over the blisters he had earned in the process. Claire sat on the swing, her eyes shining. "It's perfect," she whispered. And as Ethan pushed her gently under the wide suburban sky, he thought, this is what love is meant to be. The headlines never stopped. Even after the wedding, even after the scandal with Victoria had been exposed, the press couldn't resist. Caldwell marries. His maid screamed one tabloid, from penthouse to porch swing. The CEO who fell from grace, sneered another. At cocktail parties and charity luncheons, whispers turned to open mockery. Former friends of Ethan smirked behind crystal glasses, their laughter dripping with superiority. "She was wiping counters 6 months ago," one woman remarked loudly. "Now she thinks she belongs among us, and he traded an empire for burnt garlic bread." Another added, sending peals of laughter through the group. Claire heard it all, even when she tried not to. At the market, women glanced at her modest clothes, their expressions dismissive. At church, some parishioners whispered behind pews. Even at the diner where she once worked, curious customers asked, "So, what's it like being Mrs. Caldwell now? Do you miss scrubbing floors?" It stung, though she never admitted it to Ethan. At night, when he held her close, she swallowed the ache and whispered only, "I'm fine." But Ethan knew. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing he had built, Claire finally let the words slip. "Maybe they're right," she murmured, staring at the fading sunset. "Maybe I don't belong in your world." Ethan turned sharply toward her, his eyes fierce. "Then it's a good thing I don't want that world anymore." She tried to smile, but her voice cracked. I'm tired of being their joke." Ethan took her hands, calloused from years of work, and pressed them against his chest. "Then we'll prove them wrong, not with words, with actions." And he did. The following week, Ethan called a press conference not in a lavish ballroom, but in a community college auditorium. Reporters crowded in, expecting a defensive statement. Instead, Ethan stood behind the modest wooden podium, Claire at his side, and spoke with quiet conviction. "You've all written your headlines," he began. "Some call my marriage a scandal. Some call it a fall from grace. But let me tell you what grace really looks like." He clicked a button behind him. A screen lit up with photographs, smiling students holding acceptance letters, mothers hugging their children, graduates in caps and gowns. "This," Ethan continued, "is the Rosa Dawson Scholarship Fund. In the last 6 months, it has supported 213 students, young men and women, who work while they study, who refuse to give up despite the odds. This isn't charity. This is investment in the people who make our society stronger." Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and murmurs filled the room. "Money," Ethan said firmly, "doesn't define value. Humanity does. Dignity does. Hard work does. Claire taught me that, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it with more than words, with results." The story hit the next morning's papers, but this time the tone had shifted. Caldwell Fund changes. Hundreds of lives, from CEO to advocate Ethan Caldwell, redefines success. Not everyone was convinced, of course. At the country clubs and private estates, the old whispers continued. "He's ruined his image," muttered one. "He's wasting his fortune," scoffed another. But for every sneer, there was a student clutching a scholarship letter, a mother weeping with gratitude, a professor watching another hard-working young adult thrive. Claire saw it too. At the grocery store, a young woman approached her timidly. "Mrs. Caldwell, I just wanted to thank you. I'm the first in my family to go to college because of your husband's scholarship. Because of you." Claire blinked back tears, smiling as she squeezed the young woman's hand. Later that evening, she told Ethan, "They can laugh all they want, but this is worth it." Ethan kissed her forehead. It always was. Still, challenges came, invitations to elite events dwindled, some investors pulled out, unwilling to be associated with Ethan's new image. The Caldwell name, once synonymous with skyscrapers and champagne galas, now carried an edge of controversy. But Ethan didn't flinch. He continued showing up at community colleges, at high schools, at diners where scholarship students worked double shifts before class. He sat with them, listened to their stories, shook their hands, and slowly, even skeptics began to see this wasn't a phase. This was who he had become. One night, as Claire and Ethan sat together in their cozy kitchen over tea, Claire looked at him and whispered, "You've changed so much." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, Claire, I didn't change. You just helped me remember who I wanted to be." She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly, and for the first time, she no longer felt like an outsider in his world, because together, they had built a new one. The morning light filtered through the curtains of their modest suburban home, soft and golden. Claire stood in front of the bathroom mirror, holding a small white stick in her trembling hand. 2 faint lines. Her breath caught. She touched her belly, flat beneath her cotton nightgown, and whispered, "Hello, little one." For a moment she simply stood there, tears blurring her vision, caught between disbelief and overwhelming joy. Ethan found her minutes later, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, the test still in her hand. "Claire." His voice was cautious, almost fearful. She looked up, her eyes glistening. "Ethan, we're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was heavy, but only for a heartbeat. Then Ethan sank to his knees before her, pressing his forehead against her stomach, as if already greeting the life within. "A baby," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Our baby. That evening, they sat together at the kitchen table, a notebook open between them. Ethan had scribbled lists: crib, diapers, doctor's visits, while Claire laughed at his nervous handwriting. "You've built skyscrapers, Ethan," she teased gently. "You've managed billion-dollar deals. And now you look terrified of a stroller." He ran a hand through his hair, grinning sheepishly. "Because those things didn't matter the way this does." She placed her hand over his. "We'll figure it out. Together." The days that followed were filled with small, tender changes. Ethan read parenting books at night, his glasses sliding down his nose as he highlighted passages. Claire hummed while she cooked, touching her belly absent-mindedly. Sometimes, they sat on the porch swing and simply dreamed. "What if it's a boy?" Ethan asked one evening. "Then he'll have your stubbornness." Claire smiled. "And your kindness," Ethan countered. "And if it's a girl," Claire tilted her head. Ethan's eyes softened. "Then I'll teach her she never has to bow to anyone's wealth or arrogance, not even her father's." Claire laughed, but her heart swelled with love. There were quiet nights, too, filled with reflection. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Claire turned to Ethan with a thoughtful look. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" she asked. Ethan chuckled. "Scrubbing my marble floor, ignoring me like I was a piece of furniture." "You hated it," she teased. "No," he said seriously. "I loved it because it was the first time someone saw me without the armor. You weren't impressed. You were just you, and it shook me to my core." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "And now, he whispered, kissing her hair. "I thank God every day that you told me no." For Claire, pregnancy brought its share of challenges: morning sickness, fatigue, restless nights. But Ethan was there for every moment. When she craved pickles at midnight, he ran to the corner store. When nausea left her pale and weak, he held her hair and rubbed her back. And when she cried for no reason, he simply wrapped his arms around her and said, "Cry. I'll hold you until it passes." But beneath the joy, there were also quiet fears. One night, Claire confessed softly, "What if I'm not enough? What if I don't know how to be a good mother?" Ethan took her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with steady certainty. "Claire Dawson Caldwell, you carried me through my worst storms. You taught me humility, strength, compassion. If you could change me, you can raise a child. Our child is the luckiest soul in the world." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I hope you're right." Ethan, too, wrestled with his doubts. He found himself awake at night, staring at the ceiling. What if I fail him or her? He confessed one dawn as Claire stirred beside him. What if I repeat my father's mistakes? Chasing money, forgetting what matters. Claire touched his chest, right where his heart beat steady. "Then remember this. Remember the man you've become. You're not your father. Ethan, you're better. And you'll never raise this child alone." When the first ultrasound picture came, they both wept. The tiny heartbeat flickered on the screen, fragile yet fierce. Ethan carried the printout in his wallet like a treasure, showing it to anyone who would look: neighbors, grocery clerks, even the barista at the corner cafe. "This is my child," he said proudly, his eyes shining. Claire teased him endlessly, but secretly, she loved it. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, as they folded tiny baby clothes Claire's mother had sewn, Ethan paused, holding up a soft blanket. "Do you realize," he said softly, "how far we've come? I was a man lost in skyscrapers and parties. And you were fighting battles no one saw. Now, here we are, building something real." Claire touched her belly and smiled. "This little one will grow up knowing the truth that love, not wealth, is what builds a home." They sat together, surrounded by folded blankets and onesies, hearts full of hope. The future stretched wide before them, not as something to fear, but as a promise. The little house smelled of cinnamon that morning. Claire stood in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal on the stove while the radio played softly in the background. The autumn sun poured through the window, painting golden patches on the wooden floor. Ethan entered, barefoot, holding their baby son in his arms. The child cooed happily, tugging at his father's shirt collar with tiny fingers. "Good morning, Mama," Ethan said, his voice warm with a pride that still surprised him every day. Claire turned, her eyes soft. "And how are my two favorite men today?" "Hungry." Ethan grinned. "And one of us drools more than the other." The baby giggled, as if in agreement, and Claire laughed. It was a simple sound, but to Ethan, it was the most precious music in the world. After breakfast, they settled in the living room. Claire rocked the baby gently while Ethan knelt beside her chair, watching. "You know," Ethan murmured, "there was a time I thought happiness meant a penthouse view and champagne flowing." Claire smiled knowingly. "And now," he shook his head, "now it's oatmeal and baby giggles. And I wouldn't trade it for all the penthouses in Manhattan." She reached out, brushing his cheek with her fingers. "That's because you finally understand what matters." Later that afternoon, as the baby napped, the two of them sat on the porch swing. The leaves rustled, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Claire leaned against Ethan's shoulder, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about it? Ethan, how different life would be if I hadn't said no to you that first day." He chuckled softly. "I'd probably still be throwing parties with people who didn't care about me, pretending I was happy. And She paused, her eyes distant. "I'd still be scrubbing floors, believing that love was a luxury I couldn't afford." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the truth of it sink in. "Finally," Claire whispered, "that one word no changed everything. It forced you to look deeper, and it forced me to believe I deserved more than pity. Maybe that's how love really begins, with honesty, even when it's hard." That night, after tucking their son into his crib, they lingered in the nursery. The small room glowed with soft lamplight, decorated with hand-sewn curtains and shelves lined with children's books. Ethan placed a gentle kiss on Claire's forehead. "Someday, when he's old enough, I'll tell him how his mother's courage saved me, how her honesty built our family." Claire smiled, her eyes moist. "And I'll tell him how his father found the strength to change, not for appearances, but for love." As the months turned into years, their home became filled with the sounds of life laughter, the clatter of wooden toys, Sunday dinners with neighbors, evenings spent reading by the fire. The scholarship foundation continued to grow, touching hundreds, then thousands of lives. Yet to Ethan, the true measure of success was always here, within these four walls. One evening, as they watched their son toddle across the living room floor, Claire felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked the breath from her chest. She turned to Ethan and said softly, "If I hadn't said no, we never would have found this. We never would have found real love." He squeezed her hand. "The best word you ever spoke." Years later, their story would be told and retold by students who received scholarships, by neighbors who admired their kindness, by their own children who grew up knowing that wealth and power were not the measure of a man. But for Ethan and Claire, the story wasn't about the headlines or the gossip they had endured. It was about mornings of oatmeal, evenings of porch swings, and the quiet courage it took to choose each other again and again. Claire would often reflect on it when she sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea warming her hands. "True love," she would whisper to herself, "isn't built on wealth or status. It's built on respect, on growth, and on the courage to change." And as she watched her husband play on the floor with their child, laughter echoing through the house, she knew beyond doubt they had built a life no amount of money could ever buy. At its heart, Ethan and Claire's journey is not just about romance, it is about the power of change. Ethan began as a man who believed money could solve anything, while Claire believed dignity could only be earned through hard work. Their worlds could not have been farther apart. Yet, it was one simple word, no, that forced them both to grow. From their struggles, we are reminded that true love is not about wealth, status, or appearances. It is about respect, honesty, and the willingness to change for the better. Money may build houses, but only humility and compassion can build a home. For those of us later in life, their story is a gentle reminder it is never too late to grow, to forgive, and to start again. Whether in love, in family, or in friendship, the courage to choose respect over pride and sincerity over appearances will always lead us to what matters most, connection. So, perhaps the real lesson is simple when we dare to say no to what is shallow. We leave space to say yes to what is real. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and joining the journey of Ethan and Claire. We hope their story touched your heart and reminded you of the true meaning of love, respect, and growth. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need the message. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more inspiring stories your way. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of love and change.